Now, to start things off, I'd like the opportunity to present a noble scientific researcher, a highly regarded person in the scientific world, the former tenured professor of physics, Denis Rancourt. Denis, thank you for being here. The mic is all yours.
Oh, it's my pleasure to be here, Tanya. My pleasure to see you all. I get to see the panel in a special screen, and I feel like I'm with you in the room. It's really wonderful to be here. Well, we're living incredible times. It's just remarkable what's happening, and I want to summarize in a few points what I believe is happening and what the truth is behind the actual, I'm going to try to say what's actually happening that counters this incredible amount of propaganda that is just continuous and aggressive, and in every possible venue we get the government propaganda. So I'm going to counter with what I hope are silver bullets of things that I believe are true. And here we go. First of all, there was no special virus. There was no virus that's any different in terms of how dangerous it is, in terms of how it transmits, in terms of its virulence and so on, than what the flu can be. And we tend to forget that the flu is itself a very dangerous pathogen, and it has a multitude of things that it does, and it can cause epidemics in care homes, and this is documented in the scientific literature. One of the problems is the media wants us to forget that there was even science before 2020. But if you look at what influenza has done in the world in the past, and that's really well documented, it does all of the things that we talk about and say are due to COVID, and equally strongly, and in some decades, much more strongly. So there was no virus that's special in any way in terms of the symptoms it causes, in terms of anything. All we have is a bunch of scientists who are asked to wear these COVID glasses and who are asked to see everything in terms of what the media and their supervisors tell them. And then we have a media that amplifies it. But there is always, every winter, seasonal viruses that cause respiratory disease. That's a given. There's always more mortality in the winter in the mid-latitude countries. And this was the same kind of beast. So there was no special virus, first thing. Second thing, the total deaths in the year, in the season of these viral respiratory infections, was not statistically different in the great majority of countries, was not statistically different than it has been for the last several decades. So if you want to count total deaths, forget all the propaganda about ascribing the deaths to a certain cause and everything. Just look at all-cause mortality. There has not been more deaths in this cycle year of these events than there has been, statistically speaking, for the last several decades. There used to be way more deaths when the health status of the population was lower, for example, after the Second World War and everything. But these days, the last few decades, it's always about the same, and it's at this level. So that's the second thing. There's one exception, and that is the United States of America. There are states in the United States of America that have had more deaths than that's above the statistical average. And I'm doing research on why that is and so on. But the USA is a very special place in terms of having a large pool of very socially fragile individuals that when you lock them in, take away their jobs and aggress them in this way, many of them will suffer incredible harm and many of them will die. So the USA is the only nation on Earth in the mid-latitude countries that has had a slightly larger all-cause mortality death in the year. Okay, in addition to that, there are events of many deaths that happen very quickly. So the first comment was about the total number of deaths, but they're also, as a function of time, if you look at all-cause mortality per day or per week, you can see these sudden rises. And we do see sudden rises, and we saw one very sudden rises in many jurisdictions right after the pandemic was announced. And I am convinced from my research that that was due to the response. Those additional deaths in the presence of the usual viruses that are there every winter, those additional deaths were induced by the responses. And there were two types of responses that induced these large deaths in many European jurisdictions and in some provinces in Canada, and in about 20 of the states in the United States, you have this excess. And so the responses were of two types that were mainly the killer responses. One was the MDs primed themselves for this epidemic, and they figured they had this really dangerous thing, and they overtreated with medication, with mechanical interventions, with all kinds of things. And that's certainly in many hospitals. You can pinpoint the hot spots. You can go and see what happened in one study I'm doing in France, for example. The medical response would have killed a lot of people. The other thing is the isolation of people in care homes, very vulnerable people who get socially isolated, who get taken away from society, from the people close to them, and who are subjected to huge psychological stress. That on a vulnerable person will kill you. So those types of responses, the induced stress of fragile people that are closed in an environment where these viruses can propagate, a closed built environment where the aerosols stay in that propagate the disease, those two things would have killed a lot of people. So we do see events like that. But unlike every other season, those events are hotspots in particular institutions, particular buildings. They are not generalized like you normally see in all-cause mortality in all the epidemiology that we know of in the last many decades. Okay, so it was the response that killed people. That was my point. Also, there are no special variants, so-called variants, that are particularly murderous or dangerous or anything like that. Viruses like this mutate all the time. There's always lots of mutations, and the mutation does not change things very much compared to other factors which predominantly will determine whether you'll get sick and whether you'll get really sick and possibly die. And those are how fragile you are to start. And, you know, this is known in the science. The psychological stress that you're subjected to in your life as an individual and the degree to which you're socially isolated are two of the predominant factors on whether or not you're going to catch a viral respiratory disease and how sick you're going to get from it. So we did exactly the wrong things to most of the vulnerable people. So there are no special variants that I can see that are causing anything special, but there are big differences from place to place because of how governments and the medical establishment are responding. The other thing, I want to say something about the vaccines, and this is one venue because it's live. I won't necessarily be censored, so I'll say it. The vaccine, in my opinion, the messenger RNA vaccines are fake vaccines, in my opinion. By that, I mean they know from the known technology that's been known in the labs that it's probably not going to work, that these little nanoparticles of messenger RNA that's encapsulated are not really going to be able to penetrate cells on their own and be replicated in cells and then have sufficient amounts in your body that your immune system responds to it in a targeted way. That's all just a big, it might as well be a cartoon on TV that you're watching. This technology is probably not effective, and I believe the vaccine does not prevent infection, does not provide immunity, and doesn't do any of it. Doesn't reduce the mortality either. So basically, it does nothing. It does nothing on a virus that's not particularly virulent to start with. So it does nothing on something that's not unusual. I believe the vaccine, but of course, because it is a toxic substance, I mean, messenger RNA itself is something that the body attacks and rejects and recognizes as a foreign thing. So there will be an immune response, but it's minuscule. It's due to what was injected, and it's not evidence that you're developing immunity. So I think the vaccine is one that they made in labs. The new technology allows them to make it just from deciding which piece of which gene they want to reproduce, and they don't have to have live viruses to produce this thing. So in a sense, it's safer because there's less chance of contamination by things when you're actually growing these pathogens. but also it doesn't work. So that's my honest impression of this vaccine, and having researched how the technology works and so on, and read what we know about whether or not they're effective and so on. And finally, I think this entire campaign that we're being subjected to is, and all of you know this already, but it's a huge manipulation, and it's not just intended to allow the government to surveil us through contact tracing, to make sure that we get identified, that we can be better surveilled, and so on. It's more than that. What's driving this, I believe, is geopolitics. And we're at a time right now in the world where the US is very aggressive because it is losing its hegemony. It is losing its status as the absolute single superpower. And China is developing, has high technology, is protects itself, is developing associations with Russia for defense. These geopolitical moves are the biggest overarching driving features of what's going on here. And you have to know that corporations, including big pharma and Wall Street finance, that control the corporations and everything, the corporations are basically just the plantation keepers and managers of the world. They are the ones that go in and control and exploit the populations in the territories like Africa, Latin America, and large parts of Asia and so on. So nothing happens in the world that is not allowed and condoned by the United States empire. And it is an empire, and that is very real. And the people who study geopolitics know this. And this is what is on top of this. And that's why it's not going to go away anytime soon. It's not going to go away next week. They have a plan. They are restructuring the supply routes, avoiding China, trying to isolate China economically. They know that this is going to crash the economy. They know that they want to stop you from traveling to see how the world is going to reorganize itself. All of this is part of a huge geopolitical struggle that's happening right now. That would be my other message. The last time there was a shift this big in geopolitics also caused a huge reorganization of the world. The last time was the dissociation of the Soviet Empire, or the Soviet Union of States, if you like. That was in 1991. And that caused a huge acceleration of so-called globalization and changed all the rules of the game, and caused huge mergers of the US companies taking over Europe and Canada as well through free trade deals and so on. So that was the last big tectonic shift in geopolitics. And this is the one that we're living now. And so COVID is a cover for all of these things, and is being used and manipulated within this framework. And so this is much bigger than just big pharma wanting to make money, or the government wanting to surveil us more than they normally do. Yes, they have to surveil us, but it's because we could stop them in their plans to be so aggressive in the world, and so they don't want that. So those are my views on the geopolitics of COVID, if you like. And I know I've covered a lot of territory, and I'll leave time, and there'll be questions at the end and so on. But that's pretty much what I wanted to say, unless, Tanya, you think I forgot something and you'd like me to mention something. That's pretty much where I wanted to be there. I hope I didn't go on for too long.
You can keep going. Everyone loves hearing you chat. So if you have anything else to add, by all means. But like you said, we're going to have questions if you want to.
Well, the other thing I would like to say is I'm really upset with professionals in this country and in the Western world in general. The scientists have become pure propagandists. That's all they are. It's propaganda done by people in white lab coats. That's what the scientists have become. It's really despicable to see that. The police officers have been following orders and being more aggressive than they need to be in many circumstances. So they have not been upholding the rule, the Constitution and everything, but they've just been following orders in a crazy system. Politicians are just behaving like prison guards. They are horrible. Doctors themselves are just pushers of all of this medical technology, and the journalists are brown shirts. I mean, they are just despicable people. So I'm very upset to see the professional class misbehave to this degree and not have any restraint to try to keep us within a democratic system. I mean, we're losing the residual democracy that we have in our countries at a huge pace, and none of these professionals, very few of them, are standing up and saying, wait a minute, this undoes the whole basis of our purpose in the world, to keep this all going and to be fair to everyone. So I'm very upset with colleagues and people in the professional class. I think the answer is that, you know, the judges aren't going to help us. The journalists aren't going to start realizing that they have to cover both sides or anything like that. The politicians are going to keep serving their masters, and it's not the people who elected them. And so the only thing that could really turn this thing around is people, and it's people being rebellious and rebelling and saying no, and rebelling at work and being whistleblowers and being troublemakers. And if enough people are rebellious and just reject these kind of crazy things that they want to do, like to inform them if we've been vaccinated before we can access services and things like that, if we just say no to this loss of human dignity and everything, that can go a long way. And as we more aggressively rebel, and more of us rebel, the politicians will start to understand that this means that other parties could be created and elected and could brush them aside. And there'll be a response even among judges, the legal system and everything. But it has to be people who just say enough is enough. This craziness has gone too far. And there doesn't have to be a lot of us to start. There are a lot of us, but it's not about a majority. It's about the people who are doing it being unrelenting, being very dedicated, being resourceful, being creative. And that will have an impact. And that can start to reconstruct our country and reinitiate democracy and democratic methods and ways of doing things. So I guess I would end on that note. What do you think? Did I say enough now? Where's Tanya?
Danny, you're muted.
It's okay. Hang on. I unmuted you. You're good.
There we go. There we go. Denny, yeah. I was just saying that, you know, we're so grateful for scientists and doctors like you that are stepping up and speaking out no matter what the consequences are. You are a true warrior, and, you know, you have brought us the true definition of science and wisdom and knowledge that people need to know. So thank you very much for being here, Denny. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure.